Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our discussion on the Port and FMC updates on Demurrage, Detention, and beyond. My name is Vince Capella. I'm president of Trade and Government Relations at Alba Wheels Up. And on behalf of AAEI and the Trans-Pacific Supply Chain Committee, and as a sponsor, you're welcome to our program today. I'm happy to moderate it. It's a very timely topic. I don't like to use the word resolution, but it's very timely with our temporary agreement on the ILA update until January 15th. And we want to talk about operational stabilization and any challenges and opportunities that remain. I'm really fortunate to be joined by some expert panelists here who'll discuss all the things having to do with the strike, a potential strike, and what the repercussions are, and any ongoing regulatory issues for the FMC. So I'll get started by introducing the panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Commissioner Carl Bensel of the Federal Maritime Commission. Commissioner Bensel was nominated by President Trump in 2019, recently renominated by President Biden in 2024. And for those of you out there that aren't highly familiar with the FMC's mission, it is to ensure a competitive and reliable international ocean transportation supply system that supports the U.S. economy. And this is the rub, protects the public from unfair and deceptive practices. So thank you, Commissioner Bensel, for joining us today. You've been with us before. We're really happy to have you. Next, my good friend, Mark Herzl, my fellow Angelino. Mark is the export manager at American Honda Motor Company, where he works closely with trade compliance, overseeing Honda's export compliance activities, including CTPAT, USMCA, duty drawback, UFLPA compliance. Mark is a licensed customs broker with over 35 years of experience and serves as co-chair of the AAEI Trans-Pacific Committee with myself. And Mark and I worked together before on these things. Really happy to have him here. And last but not least, I think Lisa Yackerman's name should never be in the same sentence as the word least. She is a president of the Association of, a very vocal president of the Association of Bi-State Motor Carriers, which is a nonprofit organization representing the intermodal trucking community in the Port of New York and New Jersey. She represents New York, New Jersey intermodal trucking sector as a member of the Council of Port Performance and the nationwide port stakeholder coalitions. Welcome, Lisa. Thanks for coming. Some housekeeping. For more information about the panelists, please check on the resources tab at the bottom of your screen. Please use the Q&A button to submit questions at any point during the program. We'll address as many of them as possible. And some more housekeeping. AAEI has two polls we'd like the attendees to take a moment to respond to. The launch polls will show. One is, what is your greatest concern following the ILA strike potential resolution? And the other is, on a scale of 1 to 5, how confident do you feel in your organization's ability to adapt to post-strike port operations? So with that, I'd like to get into the discussion. We have some really good topics lined up. I will pose this next question to Lisa and Mark, and Commissioner Bensel, feel free to jump in. What comes next? We have a temporary agreement that gets us to January 15th. There are issues about automation. There are issues, other issues about jurisdiction. Let me go to Mark. What is your expectation or your insight about what could happen between now and the 15th?
Well, right now we're focused on getting the mess sort of cleaned up so that we can get the cargo off the terminal and get things back to normal as much as possible before we got Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's. And I'll be honest, the 15th of January is not far off, but it is a big question mark as to what's going to happen. And I think a lot of it's going to depend upon what happens at the election. So What's going to happen there, I would be way beyond my pay grade, but we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But right now, it's just a matter of getting things moving to get back to normal to mitigate any delays we might have in the future.
Can I ask Mark as a follow-up? Are you still using a contingency plan, a second channel of distribution outside of the Gulf and the East Coast until final resolution?
No, we've gone because the disruption was relatively minor, and the expectation, hope is that it will mitigate itself. I mean, that's what we hope, but and the cost to alternative is extremely expensive. So to come up with a alternative plan is in a way of moving vehicles outside the US and other products is extremely expensive. So we're hoping that there's a resolution and that this works out, but we have a plan that we can execute if we need to, but we hope not to need to.
Lisa, do you have any insight?
Yeah, actually, I had some what I consider very good news this morning at a meeting that I had that involved several of the folks who are directly involved in the discussions and the negotiations that are ongoing. And the folks who were previously quite pessimistic in the days leading up to the strike, they were the ones who were telling me, yeah, this is going to happen. It won't last long, but it's going to happen. So it's people that I trust, people who are knowledgeable, that know what's going on and are in the room. They told me today that they are more optimistic now than ever before, that an agreement is going to be reached well ahead of the deadline. They're feeling confident that there's a willingness on both sides to just get this thing done. Yes, there are still things that need to be hammered out. The wage component has been put to bed, so that's good. There are a few other things that they need to work on. The great news is that they have a whole slate of meetings already scheduled. They are talking. That was the big thing right before, in the days leading up to the strike, where we started to get that sense of inevitability that it was coming, is they were not having the formal meetings. There were informal talks, but there was nothing on the calendar. And, you can't resolve the issues if you're not sitting across a table from each other and working on it. And so there are a whole slate of meetings that are scheduled. They know what they need to do. They have their laundry list of what they need to hammer out. And there's a lot of optimism on both sides. So that was great news to hear. In terms of bouncing back from the impacts of the strike, things are going pretty well. I mean, I polled my members over the last couple of days just to see how people are doing. And more than, I would say it was a third, said that they're back to normal. They're not experiencing the impacts from the strike. So that was good to hear. About half of those who responded said they are still feeling some impacts, but it wasn't as bad as a week ago. So we're definitely on the upswing in terms of getting back to a sense of normalcy. There are still some challenges, which I'm sure we'll get into, but we're back on track.
Lisa, I have a follow-up. In light of the optimistic news that you shared, you see your members still have a plan B just in case after the 15th?
We always have a plan B and a plan C and a plan D just in case the first two don't work out. Yeah, always. And I think, it's what's interesting is this hadn't happened in so many years. For some folks, they'd never experienced this before. The having a work stoppage, and now there's no learning curve. The folks who went through it, they know what they need to do. They had a lot of contingency plans in place. We did a great job of clearing the decks, of clearing out the terminals. I think the stat was that there was only 22,000 containers on port wide that were left on the terminals when the stoppage began, which is
Right.
crazy for a port our size. So yes, my members know what they need to do. That's just maybe it's a New Jersey thing. It's hope for the best, prepare for the worst. That's just how we live our lives. So yeah, there will be contingency plans in place. We're constantly keeping our ears to the ground as far as how things are going. But like I said, the folks who were the most pessimistic are actually saying some really good stuff, and so it was good to hear this morning. We're confident, but yeah, we always plan for the worst just in case.
Yeah, I just remember at Alba, we were in that mad rush to figure out which containers were going to make it, which ones weren't. Are we paying the duty? Are we not paying the duty? Definitely don't want to go back to that. I'm going to go to Commissioner Bensel. I have like three biggies in a row, and I'm sure that Lisa and Mark will jump in.
Well,
Uh,
Vince,
um,
I would like to
yeah, go
comment
ahead.
on the
Yeah, sure.
negotiations, and I've kept track with both sides about what's going on, and I'm sort of more like Lisa. I think jurisdictional issues have been resolved as far as I can tell with Charleston coming to an agreement with labor. So it really is about a term that I don't like to use much, automation, because U.S. ports are not in a position to accept a wide scale automation just because of some of the particularities at the port. So hopefully, I think that if the industry is allowed to negotiate these things and they look at safety enhancements and efficiency and the ability to negotiate these at a local level, that those issues will be resolved as well. So, but sometimes negotiations. The worst thing about negotiations is sometimes people talk strongest outside of the negotiation, and hopefully they'll get over the strength of conviction on outside communications and talk internally about how they can resolve it.
Well, no, thanks for that. That was actually helpful. So I got three, but I'm going to start with, I think, the easiest, maybe the simplest first. There was a lot of question leading up to October 1. What can a terminal or carrier charge demurrage or detention if the container is not available, right? And my question is, what is the FMC view on that? And secondly, do you feel that the Ocean Shipping Reform Act new rules are strong enough to work to mitigate that issue? I'll just let you speak to that.
Sure. Ooh. It's a little nuanced in terms of my views, and these are my views. And I counseled the shipping public to get their containers returned to terminals if they were facing detention charges, and to get them out of terminals prior to any strike that prohibited them from being able to pull those containers. The law's really been that if you are in penalty, you can remain in penalty. And I don't know if the FMC and OSRO requirements change that. But it's probably a debatable issue. But essentially, however, if it was an issue prospectively, if they were trying to assess new penalties or charges, or they couldn't get to the terminal to do it, and then they started assessing detention or demurrage for unavailability that couldn't be performed, I'm confident that the new requirements would be applicable. So it's a little bit of both, and so I told folks in advance of the strike, please get everything back to neutral, and I think you're okay. But it's still, this is a issue that is still formulating. I'm sure we're going to see some claims as a result of the actions that occurred. FMC had one administrative law judge when I started. We are now full-time with 3 administrative law judges, and we've brought on 2 temporary law judges. So the volume of claims that have come in since the pandemic are at all-time highs. I anticipate we'll have more.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. So a follow-up to that is there someone we could publicize after the webinar during that could be contacted with the claims when they happen?
Sure, there's a couple of ways to do it. The first way is basically reaching out to our consumer assistant and dispute resolution services. www.fmc.gov, and there'll be a link to that. We've actually added, as a result of the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, additional personnel. Their job is to mediate between carriers and terminals and shippers and drivers about what is being done. And so they can affirmatively reach out on behalf of the commission to find out and search out the facts and hopefully resolve issues without any action. Second method is to alert our Bureau of Enforcement and BIAC. Also at the same website. These are our investigations folks, and you can call up and you can tell them this is what's happening. I feel this isn't right, and they may choose to investigate on their own these complaints, or they may advise this is the sort of thing you may want to either pursue as a claim at the FMC. The process at the FMC now is for small claims, regular legal suits for complaints, and we also have the charge complaint process, which is a simplified process for adjudicating claims after the enactment of the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. We have a really good webinar on our website as well on the charge complaint process. But those are the ways, the 5 or 6 ways we can be responsive to challenges on potentially unreasonable practices.
Yeah, and Vince, if I could add, I think
Sure.
that's a really important role that the FMC is playing very actively, is just being part of the conversation and sort of, the teacher, if you will, in the room, right? Having someone with their authority to step in and at least be part of the conversation helps make sure that everyone in the conversation is having an adult conversation. So thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah. Lisa, anything or on that or
Yeah, the thing about the whole detention demurrage charges that we're starting to see an emerging issue with it. It's been a problem for a while, even though the billing has changed with the rules, the bills are supposed to go to the shippers. The burden of proof is still being placed squarely on the shoulders of the motor carrier. And so if you do feel you're being charged unfairly for detention demurrage, you're being told, okay, well, you need to provide screenshots of the, with proof that there was no return location if it's about an empty not being. And I thought, well, you have that information. Why are you asking me for this information? So there's that. And then when it comes to we have a particular issue with not enough appointments at one particular terminal that is requiring appointments all day in New Jersey. And when you can't get an appointment for, day after day, they tell you keep trying. And then ultimately, if it goes into demurrage, again, they're told, okay, well, if you want an extension, show us proof that you tried to get appointments. Show us screenshots from every time you tried each day in advance of when you ran out of free time. So we have truckers that are taking screenshots all day long. It's really unfortunate. And then the other part of this that we're seeing, an emerging issue is, okay, so they'll give you an extension on the free time for the detention demurrage, but there are other charges that you're incurring that are not being assessed by the ocean carriers, but they're charges that the shippers are incurring, because if you can't get an appointment to bring in your empty, somebody has to hold on to that box. Or if you have an export that's going out, we're seeing this issue with exports now. You've got a booking there, it's open for receiving. You've got the 3 days to get it in, and you can't get an appointment day after day after day to get these exports in. In the meantime, that box is sitting on a chassis, incurring chassis charges and secure storage charges. So how does a shipper push back against that? That's not something that's being assessed by the ocean carriers. That's just that's a charge that's associated with holding on to the box. So these are the kinds of things that we need to look at, maybe as we're looking at some additional rulemaking or tweaking what we have now. that we're going to have to talk about how do we get reimbursed for these kinds of charges when we're put in a situation where we cannot, have every incentive in the world to bring it empty back, and there's no return location, and a chassis being held captive and assessing charges. Who gets that bill? Does the trucker have to absorb that bill? Does the shipper have to absorb that bill? How does this happen? I can just tell you how it's working with my members is they're starting to bill the ocean carriers. They know at some point, that they're going to get refused, and they're not going, the ocean carriers are saying we're not paying it. But I've told them, we'll start your paper trails, start sending them bills, start so that we can quantify how much this is costing. Because depending on if it's an extended period of time that you can't return these boxes, you can't return these empties, it can, the cost can be considerable. And, there needs to be more transparency across the supply chain. This is something that Commissioner Bensel has taken the lead on with his, marine data.
The MTDI, yep.
Yeah, the TDI. It's not as if we don't know this. He spent a lot of time talking to people and putting together recommendations, and we really need to act on a lot of what he has put forth, because I think that's the thing that we are missing. That's the piece that we are still missing from the puzzle, is this transparency across the supply chain, so that everyone can see what the challenges are. And we're not doing these screenshots, that it should be very easy for the billing department at an ocean carrier to check in with the equipment department at an ocean carrier and say, oh, there was no return location for this box. Okay, so there was no way for them to bring it back. They shouldn't get a bill. Why it isn't like that now, I don't know.
So I'm gonna go to, that was a later question, but I think I should back to Commissioner Bensel. I was gonna ask a question, but Lisa, that's really, so you're talking about the non-tariff. Those are the charges that aren't in the tariff that are coming from third parties, and we get them on exports too, when we miss a gate or we miss an appointment. So the role of automation in the negotiations, right? The whole thing you're talking about is having more stakeholders have visibility into what's happening, that are not necessarily the carrier of the terminal, and necessarily the carrier terminal that sharing all the data. So I'll turn this to all three panelists on the role of automation. And okay, we won't use the word automation. Everybody likes to use it, but technology. I'll tie it to the Marine Transport Data Initiative that Commissioner Bensel talked about so much. So two parts. One is the role of negotiations in the labor contract. What does that do to efficiency? But also, does the MTDI ideas and suggestions have a role to mitigate some of this stuff, right? And maybe I'll go to Commissioner Bensel first, and then
I think Lisa's comments were good comments. They actually illustrate the frustration with not getting adequate information about what the policies are, and being able to protect yourself. And the Maritime Data Initiative, one of the things that we would require is for marine terminals to keep the information related to access to their terminals available to the public. So drivers aren't sitting there taking screenshots, but you go to a web page, and the web page will say exactly what the posture was of the company for purposes of operations, whether appointments were available, whether you could get in or get out. This is routine business for most of America. It really is. It's internet access, so it's not automation really. It's just the provision of information that allows companies to do their jobs. So the terminals. I talked to them about, do you have this information? They do, and so it's really just making the information available to a trucker, so that someone can sit behind a desk and say, listen, 78% of the day on this day, they were not admitting truckers. So you can't charge us for those days. And so to allow that information on when ships are going to come into a port. If you went to an airline and they gave you the information that ocean shipping lines give you about when to show up for a flight, the public would be outraged, horrified, and we would have slam dunked requirements to require better information. And so that's a challenge, and automation does play into it, but not really. This is really about basic information about where your company is in the movement of cargo, when they're planning to come in, whether or not you can get into their facilities, and so they were structured to use existing information to provide access to that information so that it's transparent. It can be used for enforcement issues related to detention and demurrage, or just planning your route and planning your services. So we have to do better on that. And so, yeah, I think it's the next step. It's still a challenge to enforce all of these requirements at the FMC level. We are getting data influx from shippers who are making allegations on violations of detention and demurrage invoicing that are, thousands of pages. And so that's probably not the best thing when we could get this from a computer and use it.
Right.
So I think we have to do better on all of these things. It will save the industry so much. I mean, on the trucking segment alone, I think the environmental benefits of not having to show up for a terminal and waiting for an hour or two and then being told that you can't pick up your cargo on any one day it would stun the public that we're wasting this much productivity, efficiency, and impacting the environment as well. So I do think that's the next step. The next step is to create better transparency surrounding the scheduling and arrival of vessels. This would be for ERD's earliest receiving dates, clearer policies on return policy of empty containers. The default should be the containers are returned to the terminal which they originated, and if not, that the trucker or BCO that's going to pick up the container knows with specificity that it's going to an alternative location or site with advance information provided to them if there is change to that policy. So these are all encompassed in what I anticipate will be final recommendations in the next month or so for public consumption. And I do think it's the next step in moving it forward so we can create more efficiency in the work space.
Well,
Yeah,
I just want to drill down on that. That could be a breaking news for us. So the final recommendations, you think in about a month?
I'm working on them now. I've reviewed all the comments. There's been some good comments that will require adjustments to the original recommendations, and I hope to get it finished. I'm working on 2 reports now. One on cargo theft, which is a big problem, which I'm wrapping up, and then I'll turn back to maritime data for what I hope are final recommendations later this fall.
Now, on behalf of the BCOs, I think that's super important, because every time there's wasted dollars and inefficiency, that goes to the customer, to the cost of the goods, right? So this hurts the American customer. It makes the export customer, makes U.S. goods a little less competitive. So as much as we can squeeze out these additional costs that maybe we can find some other alternative for through technology, is greatly welcomed by, I think, everyone in the room, including those on the dock.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I go ahead, Lisa. You go ahead.
Lee.
I was going to say that's an important distinction that I think Vince made at the beginning, which is, automation versus technology, 2 totally separate conversations. I think technology is really important, and everybody has been saying the same thing. Our goal is to increase efficiency and to maximize the double moves, because that is the most efficient way of doing business. But we need to make sure that when we're sharing this data, that it's done with context. One of the things that's so striking to me is that right now, the way it works, we're being held to a standard that the ocean carriers aren't willing to meet themselves. When they're asking us for these screenshots with timestamps of everything that we're doing, and yet they won't archive the information, as Commissioner Bensel was saying. It just, you can't go back in time and see what the empty return information was for a week ago or 2 weeks ago or even 3 days ago. That's not archived anywhere. They don't save that anywhere. And when it comes to technology, there are things that sound good on paper, like appointment systems. They sound like they make sense. They sound like they should work. But this industry has so many variables and so many things that happen that it's not a perfect science. And when you have particularly a facility where it's appointments mandatory all day long, and you book the appointment, and then there are things that come up and you need to cancel. And right now, one of the issues we have is that at this one particular terminal, you cancel an appointment, there's no way for anyone else to know that you've canceled. There's no waiting list function. So an appointment is going unused, and there's no way for someone else to capture it. But then at the end of the day, the terminal will spit out a report that they'll provide to the ocean carriers that says, look, there were this many unused appointments today. And so when we go to fight the bills and we say, look, at this time, there was no appointments available, they'll say, well, we have this report that says 5 appointments went unused. So why didn't you get it? And I don't want to bore you with all the details of why that is, but there's a multitude of reasons why an appointment goes unused. It depends on when it was canceled. It depends on what the traffic was outside the terminal. If it was that pickup was predicated on dropping off an empty that got turned away at the last minute and they had no chassis. There's a multitude of reasons. So sharing data is important, archiving data is important, and the data needs to be shared with context. You can't just look at a report and know all of the background
The
to it.
context is, I remember 2022, 21, 22 building those document packets, like, forensically, right? So Commissioner Bensel, I think you wanted to talk again about that. Mark,
No, I mean, we also need to harmonize the lexicon that's used. I mean, some people call per diem detention, what I determined to be detention, and the demurrage. We have demurrage being charged by terminals and carriers. What demurrage is right? Is it the carrier demurrage that doesn't own the terminal, or is it the terminal itself? So if we will have legal issues because there's no real clarity in the terminology, the definition, the context surrounding these claims. So I would like to say, I was down, and there's the law and the application of the law, the regulations. And there's also things that go behind the scenes. So I was down, I was meeting with Zim in Norfolk, and they had taken the new requirements and they gave me a presentation about what they're doing on billing. And they'd spent a lot of time, effort, resources in refining their practice of invoicing and responding to claims on invoicing. So I think behind the scenes, every time we do something in a regulatory fashion, there will be some enhancements that the industry does, just anticipating the new framework. And I say we're sort of like the people who paint the lines at a football stadium. We sort of set the parameters and let the industry do what they do within the confines of those. And so I do think that there's some progress that's being made. Unfortunately, detention and demurrage is an assessment that occurs after some sort of mishap. I do think that maritime data is something that can avoid the mishap. That can avoid the trucking company that shows up to pick up a container that can't be picked up. that shouldn't be made noticed as available, or alternatives with empty returns or anything else. So the first step was really to address detention and demurrage. Was $12 billion of assessments for detention and demurrage during the pandemic. That's a lot.
It sure is. Mark, I was going to go on to the next two, but do you have anything to add?
No, I agree with all those comments completely.
Yeah. So I said we have 20 minutes. We want to do 10 minutes for a Q&A. But there's two things I wanted to get in to all three of you. So as a BCO, we didn't get them directly, but as an NVO, we did. Two things. One, I'll just bundle these two questions together. One is, we got these notices from the carriers that there was going to be surcharges because of the labor disruption, not really saying specifically what they were for, just they were loosely tied to potential labor disruption. And we haven't seen yet any counter communication that they're not still going to happen. Some of these charges from it, some of these additional charges. Then secondly, the force majeure question, in other discussions, it's come up that, you know, the spirit of force majeure is purely unforeseen, right? And was this purely unforeseen? So definitely want to hear from Commissioner Bensel about those carrier charges, not well defined, the force majeure, but also Mark and Lisa, Mark especially as a BCO. So Mark, you're on the screen, so we can start with you.
I think you know, luckily we haven't personally yet seen those. So it you know, and at this point I would say, you know, hope is a good business plan, right? We hope not to see them. You know, we are encouraged that things are going in the right direction and that this will not be an issue in the future. But right now it's hard to comment because I don't have it. But I think your comments are right. We'll just have to wait and see, you know, when these start to come out and when bills start to come out and people start to you know, contest them and go to the FMC and these issues get worked out. I mean, that's why they have administrative law judges and to help make sure those things are properly addressed with the law. But I'm not really able to comment on it because I haven't yet seen it.
Commissioner?
So the surcharges were assessed pursuant to commission regulations that require 30 days notice, public notice, prior to the assessment of a surcharge. And so the industry announced them. It's not only the carriers. I think almost every carrier announced some form. Some of them were both East Coast and the West Coast. Some were just East Coast. And there was not very good specifics. It was just a notification, and that notification served to allow them to assess it 30 days from the date of the filing. The FMC has collected, and actually it wasn't, there was literally thousands of them because NVOCCs would make similar announcements and modify their tariffs to reflect what the ocean carriers they had contracts with, so they could pass those through. So there's literally thousands of announcements. The FMC is collecting all of the information related to all of the surcharges that have been assessed pursuant to the strike. So we have a list of all of them. I get them routed to me daily or weekly, a couple times a week, and we're assessing them. The Ocean Shipping Reform Act made some specific changes into the authorities of the FMC to require us to be more vigilant on all charges, not just detention and demurrage charges. And the category of our new statute identifies charges and says the FMC shall investigate the reasonableness charges. And so to me, that means that we have to do some level of review for all of these types of claims. So pursuant to that, I talked to the chairman. The chairman and others are in a concurrence that we need to assess the reasonableness of these charges. So we have all of the carriers on audit already for detention and demurrage. And pursuant to that program, we are asking for additional information on the implementation of those surcharges. So we've gone out for additional information. I think the Secretary of Transportation asked for action from the FMC. It was already in the works. So we are in the process of asking additional information from every carrier that has assessed a surcharge. Some of the carriers have reversed their surcharges, so some of them are being canceled or suspended. I'll have to check. So that's happened. And a surcharge under commission regulations has to be reasonably related to the intended purpose for which the charge is assessed. So there's a lot of questions. So we'll have to look at what their formulas are in designing the surcharge, and ultimately, right now we're collecting information on it, and we can decide if we think that we need to challenge these through enforcement. So that's an issue that remains to be seen at this point. But we are actively assessing all of the surcharges related to the strike. And so I can tell you that, and more remains to be seen. I think if there's a culmination of a new labor agreement, I think the pressure might be off, and we will see a withdrawal of all of the charges, but who knows? And definitely this has had an impact on all parties as a result of the dislocation during the labor strike. So it's an ongoing issue. But I will tell you, we've committed to and are already collecting information related to that to see that these were assessed legally. And the major issue is, how did they arrive at these charges? Are they reasonably related to the purpose for which they're assessed?
Thank you, Commissioner. I do want to, I see the poll results coming in, and I see some questions coming in, and by far, there's a 64% say that their biggest concern, if all of you can address, the biggest concern is supply chain disruption, right? And I just want to say that at Alba and with our customers, that is our biggest concern. And we are not abandoning, to Lisa's point, our plan B. And just keep in mind with perishables and produce that these alternate channels are not as easy as durable goods, because they rely on temperature controlled facilities once they leave the terminal, and the West Coast is pretty jammed up because people were anticipating October. So I'll if we could do a round robin on that from all three on the disruption aspect. Again, I know we kind of addressed it, but it is a big concern. And then I'll check some of the questions as they come in. Mark, I know you've talked about disruption, but maybe you can reiterate some of that.
Well, I mean, I think when you're in our business, which is a production line, you don't have seasonality that some other retail businesses might have. And so we're going all the time, and any disruption quickly causes a backlog that is difficult to get out, because you can't really hold off on shipping stuff. The vehicles roll off the line, the parts roll off the line. You've got to keep it moving. So for us right now, thankfully the event was momentary in the scheme of things. And we haven't had any huge issues, but you know, if it got to be much worse than it was, it certainly would have a cascading and exponential effect.
Yeah, Lisa, I was just wondering among the members who service the BCOs, are they anticipating any volume drops with the BCOs, maybe using West Coast or Canada?
You know, we saw a little bit of diversion over to the West Coast, but not a lot, not as much as we were afraid of. And I think it's great that the strike was short-lived. And like I said, there's a lot of confidence that this is not going to happen again. So no, I mean my members don't seem worried about that. They have good relationships with their BCOs, and you know, I think the vast majority of the cargo is staying here. I don't we you know, we got a big bounce from what happened with Baltimore with the bridge there. We actually had some business come our way that has not gone back. So yeah, my members are definitely committed to keeping as much of the freight here as possible. In terms of, you mentioned perishables, I just wanted to say one of the issues we identified leading up to the work stoppage was a shortage of gen sets. And that is something that was an issue that we are now actively trying to get out in front of. Not just, God forbid, if there's another work stoppage, but just, you know, as we want to try and increase the amount of freight that's coming through, that is something that we're looking at, that we're not caught short again with something of that nature. And then also, you know, a lot of my members really started to get more flexible in terms of their driver schedules. They did everything they could to keep all of their drivers working even during the stoppage. And then you know, we're not seeing the drop. We had such a big influx of freight out in front of the strike. And then we were expecting a huge drop off, and we're not seeing as soft a drop. You know, it's staying pretty steady. And so that's another thing my members are looking at, is being able to adjust their driver schedules and keep them adjusted so that we can take advantage of these extended hours. The weekend hours are becoming more palatable, I think, to not just to the trucking community, but by extension their customers. I'm seeing a softening on that, where customers who were maybe not as willing to extend their hours for receiving are starting to realize that this is the way of the future, that they are going to have to be a little more flexible and adjust their hours, especially in the event of another type of stoppage, or any issue where we need to ramp up quickly. Let's see, there's a big weather event coming, and the terminals announce they're going to offer extended hours or Saturday gates or Sunday gates, that maybe it is worth their while to pay their staff a little extra to come in on a weekend so that we can keep those boxes moving and not have a backlog to contend with.
Thanks for that. Just a reminder, the QA button to submit questions. At any point, we have about 5 to 7 minutes. If I think we've dealt with the ones so far. Commissioner Betzel, I guess the force majeure question will be aligned.
Sure, yeah, force
with,
majeure. I did
yeah.
want to comment a little bit on the issue of congestion and
Sure,
disruption.
please.
The shipping world, our supply chain, is handled by the people on this call, and congestion is a killer. And I can tell you, during the pandemic, I went up and visited with Lisa and some of the truckers and some of the shippers during pandemic in New York, and I had one after the other telling me if they can't get commodities, manufacturing, automobiles. I had multiple automobile companies come in and tell me they're not getting tires or they're not getting components, and they were literally slowing down production. And so congestion, disruption is the largest challenge that we face to our economy. So it is inflation if we can't get the products in that we need for manufacturing. Chemicals are put in other chemicals that are put in products, and so if you're missing one or two of them, you usually can't do it. Buildings, heavy construction buildings, so it's incredibly important, probably even more than the price. So we transport the supply chain of the United States. Force majeure, usually invoked, through contracts, service contracts, or alternatively through service contracts through tariffs. And the FMC can look at any practices to determine whether they're reasonable, and whether or not that assessment is reasonable, or the challenge to the contract, whether the contract itself should be vitiated, or anything else, if damages. So as those issues come in, Vince will have to take a look at whether or not there's justification
Right.
for force majeure. I mean, obviously, the carriers in part are negotiating the contract with labor. So if some of their actions, one way or the other, could be imputed to impact the reasonableness of the charge. It's a judgment call. So we'll see how those emerge. I think we'll have, again, we went from 1 administrative law judge to 5.
Wow. So this is great. The MTDI final recommendation thing is really useful, Commissioner. I guess we have 4 minutes left, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I will ask this rhetorical question to all of you. I think we've all asked this question at the end of 22. Suppose everything's fine by the 15th of January and everything goes back to normal. We have a contract. Do we all take our foot off the gas on these issues again? Do we all just go back to business as usual on the MTDI, on the data issues, on the technology? I know how you all feel, I guess, but I guess I just want to, for the audience, as a reminder, Lisa, Mark.
No, I would say,
I think we've got work. Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
No, I agree. We can't not take our foot off the gas. My electric car has a pedal that I push forward when I want to go, and when I slow down, I back off. But I keep my foot on the pedal if I ever want forward momentum, right? And that is exactly what we need to continue to do here. Is we need to continue to have momentum. We may back off a bit on it because it's not as urgent as it was before, but we need to keep the pedal on the downward motion and forward motion for the for the whole issue. And we're moving that way. We got technology, right? We're talking about the importance of technology and knowing how can we increase the efficiency of this so we don't have any wasted cost for drivers, a wasted cost for trucking companies, and an additional cost to the environment. I mean, the commissioner mentioned it. I think it's really, I mean, it does cost something environmentally to have, trucks idling in line, waiting in line. The more efficient we can work, the better it is for everybody.
And I would just add to that a couple things. When people mention efficiency, the one warning that I give is when and this is more surrounding that conversation about appointment systems. They're the way to go. That's the more efficient way to do it. I always say, okay, for whom? For whom is it more efficient? Because in our experience from the trucking side, they haven't made it more efficient. They have made our job, appointments have made the job exponentially harder. The coordination that's involved, especially the lack of flexibility when appointments are mandatory all day long. If you can't get an appointment, we have some hard things that we're up against, free time clock and hours of service. And so flexibility is also important. We need efficiency, but we need to keep in mind being able to also have flexibility and make allowances, because there's, the supply chain is always interesting. The one thing you can count on is variables.
Oh, we have the commissioner back. And before I sign off, Commissioner Betzel, I just wanted to ask, I know how you feel about this. We're at 2 Pacific, but we were talking about, post January 15, keeping the pressure on these issues, which I think you're aligned as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's just too much importance with the shipping community to our national economy. It's just it's a continual effort. I think probably we're all undervalued in what we do. I think I was talking to Commissioner Dye the other day, and she was telling me a story. She had a Fortune 20 company come in. Their logistics manager was talking to her, and he said, yeah, prior to the pandemic, I would see my CEO maybe once or twice a year. Now I'm seeing him 2 or 3 times a week. I don't know if it's good or bad, but we're at the point where people are paying much more attention to what we do in recognition that the bad really hurts our economy, the national economy. And so I would say during the pandemic, the transit and aviation industries got $125 billion bailout from the federal government to go home essentially for a 2-year period. The rest of us that work in the maritime industry and the transportation, the supply chain industry, worked, carried more cargo than had ever been carried before. And even though we struggled a little bit, we were the real heroes to the economy. So, yeah, it's a continual effort that we have to do.
We have de minimis December 4, Chevron deference December 10. We have new sponsors there as well. And we wanted to point that out. So thanks, everybody, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.